Okay, so welcome to this live stream. So we are live for the first time on Antinatalist Advocacy's live stream, and I did the exact same error as I do on my own personal live streams, which is I have the audio on. So that's a good start, isn't it? Okay, so John, I usually do loads of the talking on streams. So do you want to introduce like why are we doing this stream? What is it? And yeah, just a general intro.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, first off, thanks for all of you for joining, and thank you for joining Lawrence. Yeah, thank you for sorting out the tech as well. Lawrence is definitely the more technologically proficient of the two of us. We thought that we would schedule this stream with the conference just a couple of weeks away, so that we can answer any questions that people have about the conference, any kind of thoughts, topics, anything like that that people wanted to fire our way before we get going, and just generally as well to potentially, if the stream goes well, start a habit of having fairly regular live streams on the AA YouTube channel.
Yeah, so one thing to say to people obviously is because this is a Q&A live stream, obviously we'll be asking people's questions. Now, you'll see that in a pinned message in the chat, there is a link to a form. Now, we put that form out when we scheduled this live stream, so I think it's been out for at least a week.
Yeah, about a week or so.
Yeah. So we've already got some questions that we're going to go through. But throughout the course of the live stream, if you have questions that come up and you haven't submitted them, but you want to just ask them now, then you can put them in the form as well. You can also just put them in the chat because we have the chat in front of us. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you just want to put it in the chat, then we can answer it there as well. And I think that's the only housekeeping we need to do. I'm assuming everyone who's joining this already knows about the conference, obviously. But for anyone that doesn't know the details, you can head over to Exploring Antinatalism podcast, who is in the chat. And their channel we recently released on the 15th, so that's 4 days ago, a podcast episode talking all about the conference. All of the information you need to know can be in there, and also head over to our newsletter and sign up to the newsletter. I think that is all of the admin we really need to do. Yeah. So, John, unless you have any more intros, do you want to read out the first question we got and start on that, and I will get a link to the newsletter and put it in the chat?
Sure. Actually, do you want to swap that around, because I don't have the link to the form in front? I've got the link to the form, but not to the answer sheet in front of me.
Okay,
I'll put up the newsletter.
That's fine. I've got the questions here, so you put the newsletter in the chat.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So the first question is so not all of the questions. So we put on the form, we put like a name thing in case anyone wanted to put their name, but only one person did, and they put Sarah. So thank you, Sarah. But anyway, so I'm not going to bother reading out the names because they're all anonymous. But one of the questions is, or the first question is everyone at the conference an antinatalist? Now, I'm assuming by that what they mean is everyone speaking at the conference or everyone who has been involved in organizing it. I don't think they mean the audience, because, I mean, yeah, obviously the audience we don't know who's in the audience necessarily. In terms of the organizers, yes, I mean, the organizers are just me and John. So, yes, on that front. In terms of the people talking, it could be the case that they all are. And John, obviously, you give your answer to this as well. So it depends. So most of the people speaking at the conference are openly antinatalist. That's a label they use for themselves. But some of the speakers at the conference I haven't seen openly use the term antinatalist to describe themselves, even though they may have written on the topic. Now, that doesn't mean they're not an antinatalist. It may just mean that it's not, they hold those views, but they don't particularly identify much with the label itself. So they don't tend to use it to describe themselves or whatever, which is like, whatever, it's fair enough. But I think what this question maybe gets to is like, if you're organizing an antinatalist conference, should all of the people be antinatalist? Which I don't necessarily think so. So one of the ideas one of these sort of driving things behind the conference is that we want to get people together from different perspectives who can help nurture a conversation for antinatalists to figure out, okay, well, what do we actually want to do? How do we want to do it? And how can we work together as a community to be able to do it? And in my eyes, you don't need to be antinatalist to be or to make a valuable contribution to those conversations. Obviously, most people who are going to make a contribution to those conversations are by and large going to be antinatalist because they're the ones who are going to be interested in getting involved in that. But I don't think it's a necessity. So those are all the thoughts I really have on that question. I don't know if you have any more. John, do you want me to put the newsletter link in the chat? Did you manage?
Yeah, I've tried to post it a couple of times, but I'm not sure if my internet.
Oh, you know what it is? You know what it is because you are not an admin. You're logging in from a guest account, so you won't be able to post links.
That makes
the
sense.
YouTube thing. I will do it. You give your answer to the question.
I did say right at the start that Lawrence was more technologically gifted than me, which isn't much of a feat, I have to say. But I do think you've covered the main points there. I think it really ties into the purpose behind the conference. So I've definitely been to conferences, particularly for like political parties or stuff like that, where the main purpose appears to be to like bring people together and like rally them behind a cause and kind of preach to the converted in a way. So I've seen them where, everyone agrees, everyone's like a card-carrying member of the party, and they're very much playing to their own audience. And in that kind of conference, I think it would be appropriate for everyone to be an antinatalist. But with our kind of conference, where we very much are looking to start already to kind of like spark conversations, as you're saying, Lawrence, you don't need to have the antinatalist label or subscribe to that to make meaningful contributions there because, well, I guess anyone can make contributions. I guess the only qualifications, if you like, or prerequisite would be that you're aware of antinatalism, you have some credentials that are relevant to antinatalism, and you are taking it in good faith. Like having a non-antinatalist there who would just say, I don't know, the kind of things that we got in our reacting to hate comments.
Yeah, just chat rubbish. Yeah,
maybe they wouldn't be appropriate, but there are plenty of people who can offer criticisms, constructive feedback, and also support as well. Like there is one of the things we've tried to do with antinatalist advocacy is point out where there are individuals, communities, organizations that they may not be antinatalist per se, but they do align with us on one or more different cause areas. So for this particular conference, I think it is important that we don't just play to our own crowd and that we do bring people in who may not subscribe to the antinatalist label.
Yeah, that you just touched on one thing that I was gonna bring up, that someone can be aligned with certain like interests that an antinatalist community may have, but they may not be antinatalist themselves. Like for example, just to draw our answer out a bit longer. So I used to volunteer as part of a animal rights group, and I'm sure many people have been in these sort of scenarios. You have them at work in an intense period, or you often have them in like activist sort of circles. Is that things are happening so quickly and people care about the stuff that's happening to such a degree that conflict can very easily flare up. And we had some workshops at the place I was volunteering at on conflict resolution and communication skills. And it was quite interesting because the tools that the woman who was running that workshop spoke about and gave us, I could see after that point manifesting in the conversations people had. Now, obviously, not everyone's perfect. Like, those lessons, you're fired up after the workshop, so you really employ them, and then they fade away, and it's something you've got to actively work on. But that's an example of someone who's just giving a workshop that has nothing to do with animal rights specifically, and obviously in this example, it would be antinatalism, but it can be aligned with the goals of an antinatalist community, because one of the goals of an antinatalist community is to be like a coherent enough community so that we can organize around the greater goals we have, right? Like the actual things we want to achieve, but we have other sort of, I guess you would call it maybe a secondary goal of being able to organize in a coherent way and not, have too much drama and stuff like that.
Definitely.
So
And as you
that's
said, that's
another way.
so common in social movements. Any kind of movement that's brought together by a cause in particular, like the divisions, the fractures, they are there for everyone to see. So yeah, those kind of skills, and it's not necessarily skills, it's really a mindset, isn't it? It's around having conflict. It's not around avoiding conflict necessarily, but it's around having conflict in a constructive way.
Yeah, exactly. And like, just so people know, I won't say who they are, just in case they don't want me to, but there was someone, a professional that we reached out to who deals with these sorts of topics about conflict resolution and communication and mental well-being as an advocate. But we didn't manage to get them on, maybe in a future conference. Cool. Okay, before we go on to the next question we got via the form, we've actually got two in the chat from the YouTube live stream. So the first one, I don't know how to say your name because it's not using English letters. So I just don't even know how to begin to say your name. So I apologize for that. But so they ask you a question: how do you see your parents? Do you hate them? So I think the questions we're going to stick to in this live stream are going to be about the conference or antinatalist advocacy specifically. So I don't think John and I will use any of the time in this stream to answer that question, because we really want to stay on topic. But if you have any question, if that person has any questions about like the conference or antinatalist advocacy, shoot them in the chat. We'd be more than happy. But we're going to keep it on that topic for this stream. But
Definitely.
thanks for the
And one thing I will say is that if we do have if this stream is successful and we do decide to do more, we can do generally like Q&A type streams where we will cover kind of broader questions like that. But for this one in particular, because it is themed on the conference, we'll stick to the conference.
Yeah. Do you want to, you can see the chat, right, John? Do you want to read out Lenny's question?
So a question from Lenny: are you planning to release the scripts of the speakers' talks at some point after the event? Good question. I do think, well, we're definitely planning on releasing the videos, the talks in separate videos. So you'll have the live stream of the talk will be released after the event. But we can also chunk those up into individual, the individual talks can go into like shorter videos as well. I was just wondering, Lawrence, does the software that we are using, does it have like an auto transcript function?
It may actually do, and that's a good point. So we can utilize that. But like John said, at the very least, all of the talks will be cut from the original live stream and uploaded as individual talks afterwards as well. So you can see them on catch up as well as live. But if there is demand for transcripts, then I'm sure we can make that possible. Because I know Lenny's been working on transcripts recently, and so so he and I both know that it is possible to, at least to some degree, use artificial intelligence to do the majority of the work in getting transcripts from videos. So yeah, if there's demand for it, and it looks like there's demand from Lenny, we can sort out transcripts as well. Yeah, we can do that.
Definitely. Someone who used to do a lot of transcripts by hand as part of my job. I'm very grateful that the AI has got a lot better at transcribing like live speech.
Oh dear, that is one of even though, AI, it could go either way, but maybe even if it goes the horrible way, at least we've still got the transcripts.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
I
there's
mean,
always that.
honestly, when we first had the AI in like 2019, 2020, it got so much wrong in
Mm,
terms of just interpreting words wrong
yeah,
that we
yeah.
decided not to use it, which meant that we had to transcribe a lot of interviews by hand. And then in 2021, we decided to use the AI again because it was like a learning algorithm. So it got better
Yeah.
as time went on. And then, yeah, that just saved so much time. Because those
Yeah,
first
yeah,
2
yeah.
years of that particular job, I transcribed probably over 100 interviews by hand. And it was
Oh,
just
kill me now.
really, really tough. Well, not by hand, obviously, by typing, but
Yeah,
still.
yeah, yeah, but manually.
Yes, it was very time consuming and not a lot of fun, I have
Yeah.
to say.
One thing I have actually just mentioned, not mentioned, realized. So, just for anyone watching, we are using a software that neither of us have hosted a live stream on before. So, we're still somewhat getting used to all of the sort of ability, the functions that it has. So, I've actually just noticed that we can pop questions up on stream.
Nice.
So that people can see. So it's a bit late for sorry. It's a bit late for Lenny's question to be up on screen when we were actually answering it. But yeah, if anyone else has questions now, whack them in the stream. If if not only just for us to be able to use that feature properly. But we can go on to the next question from that we got from the form beforehand.
Sounds good.
So the next one is some of the topics that are listed on the schedule for the conference seem to be irrelevant to antinatalism. Why have they been included? So this question, and it's anonymous. So this question, I would assume that there are a few talks that they could be talking about. So you've got the David Pierce.
Lawrence, can you hear me, by the way? Because you've just gone silent for me, but I'm not sure if that is my dodgy tech. Okay, I can hear you now.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
That's frustrating. I think it might be. Can you can still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it might be my internet just dived for a bit. But if I'm back now, we can keep going. If at any point my audio cuts out, just say straight away, and you just take over and keep talking.
Sounds good. So I heard up to you said about there are several talks they could be talking about David Pierce, and then it kind of glitched.
Oh right, okay. So it was for a while. Basically, I just eventually got to the point where I said they could basically either be talking about Seb Alex's talk or Oscar Horta's talk, because those are the only two that seem to be someone could perceive it as not having any relation to antinatalism. Do you want to give your answer on that first, or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I'm happy to give an answer on that first. I think it is a fair question, and definitely with some understandings of antinatalism, transhumanism, and animal rights seem like unrelated topics to questions of, say, voluntary human non-procreation. I personally think that the talks are related to antinatalism, even if you don't subscribe to a view of antinatalism that would include things like transhumanism as vegan and like veganism under the antinatalist umbrella. I do think that seeing as these are topics that come up in the community quite a lot, I think it is, they're worth talking about and worth exploring at an antinatalism conference in much the same way that, let's say, at I don't know, like a left wing political conference, you might want to talk about right-wing economics at some point, because I'm sure that's a topic that would come up in the community, in the left-wing community, quite often. So even if you don't subscribe to the idea that animal rights and transhumanism do come under the antinatalism umbrella, because they do come up so frequently in the community, and in particular that they are points of contention in the community, we thought that this would be a good space to explore them in a good faith and kind of polite, non-hostile way. And certainly the two speakers on those particular talks, Seb Alex and David Pearce, they're very open to antinatalism. I believe they, in fact, both use the antinatalist label, even though their work isn't primarily focused on antinatalism as such.
Yeah, so my thoughts on this question are, so personally, I think the only two that someone could really think this about is Seb and Oscar's. So to start with Seb's, whilst the title of Seb's talk, The Importance of Animal Rights, I agree, doesn't suggest that the talk will be, or the discussion afterwards, because each talk has a Q&A section. It doesn't suggest that antinatalism would come up, but I do think that it's a topic that is, well, one, relevant to antinatalism, but I also think part of antinatalism, because one thing, it's difficult because people disagree on the definition of antinatalism, but I and many people would posit that the antinatalist worldview has implications for our behaviors, right? The most commonly accepted implication it has is not to procreate. It has implications for our reproductive choices as individuals. This is, widely accepted amongst antinatalists, right? But there's a further conversation to have about, well, what other implications may it have for our actions? Is it just our reproductive choices, or are there other behaviors or choices or actions that we can make that antinatalism has implications for? So, for example, if someone used to donate to their local sperm bank, this is also something they would probably stop if they become an antinatalist, right? They may also stop other forms of, if there's some other form of activity that they do that may promote the creation of new humans, they may also choose to desist from that behavior or that action, right? So this does get a bit more contentious with certain antinatalists, but it's also accepted amongst many antinatalists, but not all, that it also has implications for the industries we support when it comes to animals, right? So it's not just humans that humans breed into existence. We also breed animals into existence in, laboratories, farms, puppy mills, etc., etc. Even just in our own homes, if we have a dog who we, don't sterilize, then they could get pregnant. Well, if they're a female dog, they could get pregnant and have puppies, right? So for me, this is relevant to antinatalism because it's discussing that side of things. It's discussing the industries that are very commonly supported by people in general, but also many antinatalists support animal agriculture industries. And either in his talk or in the questions that we ask Seb, it will be brought up about what are the implications for antinatalism when it comes to that, or what are the implications of antinatalism when it comes to those industries. So I do think that one's very relevant. The other one where I think this person has a good point is Oscar's talk about wild animals. Now, I personally don't think that the discussion about wild animals is part of antinatalist philosophy per se, but I think that it is a topic that is adjacent, just like, the right to die or abortion is. And I think that given that it's one of the adjacent topics to antinatalism that so commonly gets discussed and so commonly causes controversy, personally, I thought it was good to include so that we can actually have someone who is well read on this topic speak about it. And if some people may be watching this thinking, well, we know that both John and Lawrence will agree that with what Oscar Horta also tends to align with, which is you know at least being open to the fact that we may have some contact with wild animals that means that they will procreate less, right? And so they're it's just going to be they're just going to be doormats, and Oscar Horta is just going to talk, and there's not going to be any pushback and all this sort of stuff. But no, that's not the case. Like we've put questions together for all of the talks. We're not going to be doormats for any of them. We are going to give pushback to speakers, as and where we think it's appropriate. So yeah, that's all I would say for Oscar's one. Like I do understand where the question is coming from, but there are certain topics that, whilst not inherently part of antinatalism, they are very commonly discussed and do have certain there are obvious reasons why antinatalists would care about them. Let's put it like that. Yeah. Another example being the right to die. Do you have anything else to say on that, or should we go to the next question?
Yeah, just to follow on your points, just to say that we're really not looking to create an echo chamber in our conference. I mean, on the first day alone, we have transhumanist David Pearce and extinctionist Matty Hyrie. So we're definitely not just picking people who align with us on all of our positions, because those two positions in particular seem to jar. They may not, as we'll explore in the talk, they may not jar quite as much as they do on the surface, but definitely from the outset, they seem to be very different approaches to dealing with the harms of coming into existence. And then the second point I was going to say is just your comments on donating to a sperm bank. I think I may have a different take to you on that. So in a future stream, if people would like to see mine and Lawrence's spiciest takes as it comes to antinatalism, let us know in the chat. But again, as we mentioned before, today we'll be focusing on the conference.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, nice one. Do you have another question you wanted to bring up, or Lenny has put another one in the chat so I can bring that one up? It's
just
up to you. Do you have anything?
Point out a comment from Amanda from the Exploring Antinatalism podcast that there are almost no topics in antinatalism that someone out there won't feel don't belong in antinatalism, and I think that is true. That we are trying to do our best in the conference to provide like a snapshot of lots of different topics. We haven't covered them all, as you said, Lawrence. We haven't got any specific talks on the right to die. There are other topics that do appear in antinatalist circles as well. I don't know, maybe the big red button or something like that we're not covering. So there are many, many topics that we could have covered in this talk, and we tried to pick out ones that we felt were especially present and relevant, and also that people could take action on as well. People could be empowered, hopefully, by what they hear in this talk to try and take action on these issues.
Cool. Right, we have the next question. Hopefully this works. So,
nice. It's coming off on the screen.
So, yeah, hopefully people can see this on screen. So this one's from Lenny again. This is the second question from Lenny in the chat. Again, if anyone has more questions, put them in the chat. So this question: why is there no one from outside the sentiocentric camp? I think someone like Julio Cabrera would have been a good addition. And I'll keep the question up on screen whilst we answer it. Do you want to take this one first, John, or shall I?
I think that's a really great question, and maybe personally, maybe a bit of an oversight for us. I guess we started from the position that people would agree on like humans not procreating, and then kind of expanded outwards, I would say, to wild animals, to non-human animals, to transhuman. But there's an element of that. But then I guess did we talk about like getting someone from outside of the sentiocentric antinatalist camp?
Well, no, so one example of a topic we could have had is like someone actually pushing back on the idea that animals are included in any way at all, if you get what I mean. So the first thing I'll say is that there was no like intentional non-inclusion of someone who wasn't sentiocentric.
Definitely.
Like at no point did John or I have a conversation, or I mean, I can't speak for John, but to me, I never in my mind thought intentionally, oh, I'm going to suggest only sentiocentric antinatalists. I think it just worked out like that, to be honest. There were many other people we reached out to be included in the conference, but we either didn't hear back from them or they declined. So it wasn't completely within our it wasn't completely within our control who was actually going to end up on the final build, if you get what I mean, because we sent out more invites than actually people who ended up on the final list. So and we wouldn't have known at the start of the process who was going to accept, who wasn't. But I will say that there are aspects of antinatalism that have been missed out in this conference. The only thing I would say is like, it's just the first conference. There are only 6 sessions. Like I do understand that like the sentiocentric anthropocentric divide is perhaps the biggest one in antinatalism, but oh right, John's gone. Anyway, I'll wait for John to come back in, but I'm just making sure I'm still up on screen. Hopefully I'm still up on screen. I'm just waiting for the stream to catch up to see. Yeah, okay, I'm still on screen. So I will just wait for John to come back. Anyway, so that's what I was saying. Like, I do understand that the sentiocentric anthropocentric divide is probably like the biggest one in the antinatalist world. So you would expect it to appear in a big antinatalist conference. I think, as John said, it was I mean, it wasn't intentional.
Am I back in?
Yeah, you're back in. Yeah.
This is why I'll be using a new laptop. We have the conference because this one is a bit dodgy.
But anyway, as I was saying, like, yeah, it wasn't it wasn't intentional, and it probably was a bit of an oversight, to be honest, because I wasn't consciously thinking, oh, we need to have this sort of person in and we need to have this sort of person in. What we were basing it more on was like, we wanted to get people on who reflected the cause areas, which we weren't necessarily actually even able to get. So you'll notice that there's no one on the roster who is talking about digital sentience, for example.
Yeah.
We reached out to people based on all 4 cause areas, but it's just that we weren't successful in getting successful in getting someone for every cause area. So yeah, I think it's it's a valid point to bring up, Lenny, and in future conferences we will be exploring different topics with different perspectives, etc., etc.
Yeah.
We can't cover all of them in one conference, so there are going to be perspectives and people that are left out in this first one.
Definitely. And one thing I will say is that if you do feel like a particular perspective has been missing out, has been left out, sorry, of the of the sessions that we are putting on in the conference, I'd say the 2 things that you could do are, 1, ask lots of questions about it in the forums and in the chat, because we will be monitoring those. And secondly, to make suggestions in the feedback form that will be going around afterwards. As Lawrence said, this is hopefully the first of many, or at least more than one, conference that we'll be putting on over the coming years. So definitely looking to cover some of those missed perspectives from this particular conference. A major one, as Lawrence said, being digital sentience and sentient AI. And there may be sentiocentric antinatalism as one that we'd cover too. And just to stress, when Lawrence was saying about how we wanted to cover our cause areas, the mindset wasn't that we'll cover our cause areas with people who agree with us on what we say. It was more like, let's find someone who is has a particular expertise in a particular cause area and is at least sympathetic to antinatalism in a way that they would understand what it means for antinatalism, and that, again, we wouldn't get strawmanned by.
So more good faith rather than sympathetic.
Exactly. Yeah. I'd say good faith. That's right. People who would engage with the topic of antinatalism in good faith.
Yeah. Cool. Do we have any more questions in the chat? Let me check. Oh, okay. Actually, we've just literally had one in. So Lenny's shooting on all cylinders. Well, this is less a question and more a statement that we can respond to. So make sure you consider a fifth cause area, directed panspermia, in future events too,
Yeah.
especially given Elon Musk's plans and statements. So just if I could, I'd just give a quick one on this. So it was actually, well, a few things. A few things. First thing is that SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, actually just recently, I think it was yesterday, did another test launch of their rockets, and it was obviously it wasn't a complete success because we haven't heard about them, reaching another planet, but it was more successful than the last one. So it is actually a valid. It is a very valid and pressing concern, actually, because this is an area which is actively being worked on, and there is progress from their eyes being made on it. And yeah, anyway, so that's just one thing. So there was a recent update on that. So just to go back to it in terms of the context of AA. So actually, when John and I were first coming up with the cause areas, this was actually discussed as a fifth cause area. We didn't originally set out to only have 4. We just thought, what are the cause areas that we should have? And it ended up that we agreed that on 4. The fifth one that we the fifth one that we considered was, and we didn't come up with a neat name for it, so I'm just going to explain what it is rather than have a neat name for it. But it was essentially S risks pertaining to more individuals being in existence. So for anyone that doesn't know what an S risk is, an S risk is something that poses a significant risk, or significant enough risk to be worth taking seriously. The potential for an insane increase in the amount of suffering in the world, basically. So what's somewhat similar but different is an X risk, which is something that poses a significant risk of extinction. Usually when people use X risk, they're specifically talking about human extinction. But anyway, so just going back to us considering it for a cause area. So we were considering it for a cause area, and the 2 main things that we were thinking about that made us consider it as a cause area were, the first one was the potential for digital sentience to come around, and that would mean, in theory, that you could make many, many more individuals who can suffer, but in a digital form rather than a biological form, much quicker than you can in a biological form. So that poses an S risk, which is being worked on, by a few organizations already. The second one was essentially space colonization, panspermia, directed panspermia, because that's the spreading of biological life into places where it currently isn't, or as far as we're aware, it isn't. And those those 2 things were concerns to us. I can give my personal thoughts on why I didn't end up thinking that they were their own cause area. But before I go on to that, I don't know, John, if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I think the way that the cause areas are structured now is we've got categories of sentient beings that we're concerned about coming into existence. So you have humans, domesticated animals, wild animals, and sentient AI. And we were thinking more in terms of, when it comes to like moral circle expansion, like who matters with respect to, in generally, who has moral weight, but also with respect to antinatalism, what, the beings that antinatalists should be concerned about. We felt that with each of these cause areas, they got progressively further away from that common core of understanding or common core of agreement around human procreation. So a lot of antinatalists obviously concerned about human procreation, and then a smaller proportion concerned about domesticated animals, a smaller proportion concerned about wild animals, and some concerned about like AI. We were thinking very much in terms of framing it as this core cause area, not core in terms of more important, but where there's probably the greatest level of agreement with antinatalists, and then expanding it to other categories of beings who could be harmed by coming into existence. And I guess with something like panspermia, it's not that there's another category of beings that we should be concerned about, but more like an action that has
specific activity.
Yeah, an activity that has specific ramifications for, well, potentially all four sentient beings. I mean, people talk about like farming on other planets, and I hope they don't mean animal agriculture. But there are some people who are very keen to spread like ecosystems, like recreate the Amazon on a different planet. And I sincerely hope that they either change their minds or fail in that endeavor. But also with panspermia, I do think we need to be concerned about like digital sentience as well going through the universe. Like, you could imagine it being fairly easy to transport digital sentience compared to like biological sentience across distance of space and time, not needing to be fed, whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that was mainly the way that we were thinking about it at the time. But we can definitely, just to echo your point, Lawrence, we're definitely open to change. Like those four cause areas aren't set in stone by any means.
I'm not sure if this, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure if this question is aimed at us or if it was aimed at someone in the chat, because I haven't checked every message in the chat. But Mark has said, what's your concern personally? Do you think that was specifically about people spreading ecosystems? Or Mark, you might need to clarify in the chat with that one. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. If it is for us, then resend it with a bit of clarification, Mark. Cool. So I don't think there are any questions in the chat that we haven't gotten to, but if anyone has any more, send them. John, did you get any more questions beforehand in the stream? Because we actually only got those 2 questions on the form. So we've done the form.
I will double check the stream, but I think we've covered the ones in the stream. I think there were maybe a couple on the announcements that went out, but I think those have already been covered around why we've got certain speakers in or the topics that we are going to cover. And just in general, a couple of ones about how, it will be free. Like you don't have to sign up to anything. Just turn up on the day. Obviously, we'd be very grateful if people could engage live. But as we mentioned before, we will be releasing the videos afterwards and potentially transcripts if there is a demand for that.
Okay. John, what I'm going to do is I've just put, no, sorry, that's the wrong one. I've just put Mark's question up on screen. He's clarified his question. Do you want to give your answer to that first? Because someone has just posted in the chat, Nazogaster has just posted in the chat saying they did submit one via the form just recently. So I'm going to go look at the form. If you could just answer that, give your answer to that one.
And that sounds good. So in terms of what are the goals of AA around digital sentience, wild animal suffering, and long-termism? So around digital sentience, there are quite a few people. Well, I'd say quite a few people. It's a small number if you compare it to all of the people on the planet. But certainly in effective altruism spaces, people who are concerned about S risks, they're very concerned about the prospect of digital sentience. So the Sentience Institute, which is a non-profit that focuses on this topic in particular, would be one of those organizations. So from our perspective, if we can oppose the creation of digital sentience, that would be great. If we can avoid bringing in sentient beings, whether they are digital or not, from our perspective, that would be ideal. I think if digital sentience is created, then they would become a morally relevant category of beings as the other categories of beings. In the case of, we would be opposed to bringing more into existence, but we'd look to improve the experiences of those who were already here, if that makes sense. And also avoiding harming those that would inevitably come into existence. It's really hard to say whether or not, as in with humans, that there will inevitably be digital sentience. But I think with sentient AI as non-speciesist antinatalists, we would have the same take as we would for any other category of individuals, as in avoiding bringing them into existence and improving the lives of those that unfortunately do. What are your thoughts, Lawrence?
Well, so I'll just give like general. I mean, so one thing that Mark has touched on there, long termism, um, is somewhat separate from the others because digital sentience and wild animal suffering are two of the cause areas, whereas long termism, it's not something. Whilst it's something that is definitely related to the things that we, in AA care about. Long termism as a specific idea is not something like in a cause area we're particularly, it's not like one of our cause areas, but it is obviously linked to them. Whereas digital sentience and wild animal suffering are specifically actual cause areas. The thing I would say generally is that when Mark is asking what our goals are, so our goals generally with our cause areas are if we wanted to, should we just go through the theory of change? Do you think it would be worth just going through the theory of change with people quickly?
I mean, we could do in a very kind of broad sense. So, like the broad category of activities are informing people about the cause areas and then empowering them to take action on them through their donations or careers in some sort of capacity.
I've got the theory of change here. So I'm just going to quickly go over a few bits of the theory of change. So there's a few different aspects of a theory of change, but to answer Mark's question in terms of the long-term goals, really what we want to do as AA in general is, yes, we want to do like our own projects that will target specific things, but in general what we want to do is help provide materials, guidance, resources to people who recognize the value of antinatalism in making the world a better place, and they are trying to take that forward and carry out some sort of activity that's going to help hopefully make the world a better place with antinatalism as a sort of framing to that, and we want to be there to be able to help people do that. So how the conference fits into this is like the conference is helping to frame the conversation of, well, what actually do we want to be aiming on? What activities do we want to be working on? These are like the first things we want to be asking, so that then when people make up their mind in an informed way on what they want to work on when it comes to antinatalism, then we in the future will be doing things that can help facilitate them do that, if you get what I mean.
Definitely. I think the term that we use in the charity sector in the UK for the kind of organisation that we imagine AA being would be like an anchor organisation. So, for example, on a social issue, you'll have think tanks, pressure groups, people who are providing direct support to individuals, that kind of thing. They're all working within one sector, and then you'll have an anchor organisation that seeks to support the sector as a whole and support individuals and organisations to have impact on this particular issue. So for us, we are very much imagining ourselves as somewhat of an anchor organisation for antinatalism, in the sense of looking to provide support for individuals to take action on this, well, on individuals and organisations, basically just to provide support for those who are looking to take action on these four cause areas. But we do have some aims potentially down the line that once we have raised suitable funding and built up our capacity to act as well, to do kind of primary, like direct work on problems. So research, for example, would be one of the things that we'd be looking to do. But for now, it is very much about supporting, informing people. Like the first part of our strategy is basically around getting ideas out there, which is what the conference is really key for. And then the second part is really focusing on empowering people to take action. And one thing I will say is that we really don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. By highlighting these four cause areas, we like to think that we've been able to show, and highlight the work of organisations that are already working on these cause areas, that we don't need to start from scratch, that there are organisations that we can donate to, there are organisations that we try and work for, there are career paths that we can try and take. to have an impact on these different cause areas. And part of our role with antinatalist advocacy is to try and signpost people and support people towards those opportunities for impact.
Yeah, so just to quickly go back directly to Mark's question. So it may be an unsatisfying answer to Mark because we don't have specific, like, oh, for wild animal suffering or digital sentience, we want to achieve specifically A, B, and C, because the whole point is that we want to start a conversation about what is A, B, and C, what even is that? Because at the moment, I don't think antinatalists, my perception, I can't say for sure, you know, maybe certain individual antinatalists have a very clear idea of what they want to achieve with their actions, but I personally, and I think John also thinks that the antinatalist community can benefit from more focused conversations about what we actually want to achieve when it comes to our actions, and where should we be achieving those things in terms of who, for humans or you know, non-human animals, or potential, you know, digital sentience in the future. So at the moment, our aims are quite broad, and then in the future, as we grow capacity, we will be able to have more targeted aims on specific things. Like John said, you know, we may be able to engage in some research, etc. But yeah, at the moment, we're very much geared towards starting conversations, and then in the future, helping to empower people after having been informed by those and other conversations in carrying out action. I hope that was satisfactory enough of an answer for Mark. Did you have anything else to say, John? Or we've got a few questions that have actually come in. So
that was everything I was going to say on that. I do need to quickly run and blow my nose. It is cold and flu season in the UK.
No, that's all good. I will just, when you're back, just let me know, and I'll bring you back on screen. Okay, cool. So the next question is, okay, actually, so there's some questions in the chat, but we also had some through the form that we said we were going to get to. So because they're from the form, I can't bring them up on screen, but the latest, the second to latest, there are two that have come in. So the first one is, what do you hope to accomplish with antinatalist advocacy? And do you think antinatalism can become a larger collective movement similar to something like veganism? Okay, so, and you back, John?
Yes, I am.
Cool. Okay, nice one. All right, you're back on screen so everyone can see you. Okay. So did you hear that question that I just read out?
Yes, I did.
Okay, cool. So personally, I think we've kind of answered the first bit about what we want to accomplish with antinatalist advocacy. So I think we can focus on the second bit about if it can become a larger and collective movement. I think it can. I don't see any reason why it can't. Obviously, there are going to be barriers in the way, both external and internal to the community, but every community has that. It's not something unique to antinatalism. So to be honest, I don't really have much else to say. I think it can. I think there are many people who want it to be like that. I think there are people also who are willing to put in the effort to do that. And, you know, some of them are even in the chat. So I think yes. I don't really have much more to say on it, to be honest, because I just think it's a straight yes, it does have the potential for that.
Yeah, I think yes. I think in terms of comparisons with veganism, I think there are some things that are in antinatalists' favour, and there are some things that will make it harder for antinatalism to catch on compared to veganism. The thing that it has in its favour is that in the West, I think approximately 20% of people don't have children. So people are already engaging in a behaviour which is associated with the movement compared to, I think,
or a lack of a behaviour.
Yes, or a lack of a behaviour associated with the movement. Similarly with veganism, but it's like a fraction of that. Maybe 1 to 2% of people don't consume animal products. So we do have a base of people who at least potentially would be more open to hearing what we are saying because they wouldn't be taking it as a personal attack. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that mindset change follows behavior change. and that when people stop engaging in a behavior, they are more open to hearing criticism about it. So from that perspective, there are potentially a lot of antinatalists out there. In terms of what might disadvantage antinatalism, for one thing, I think the name anti anything sounds
Yeah.
a bit negative and a bit miserable. I've not come across anything that would better replace it. And given how established the name is now, I think it's one thing that we are, we're kind of stuck with. No, and I don't mean to say that it's entirely negative. I do think that antinatalism does accurately describe what we're trying to describe, but anti anything is just a bit of a hard sell.
Yeah.
Also, difficulties around speaking about it. I think
Mm.
it's where you live and the particular cultural context that you're in can make it more or less difficult to talk about it than veganism. But in terms of potential, same as Lawrence, I see no reason why antinatalism can't kick on and become a broader social movement.
Mm.
And we're certainly trying to help that happen.
Yeah, no, 100%. The second question that's come in via the form is, are you planning on asking people to subtitle the talks in other languages after the conference? So that is a very good point, actually. We hadn't actually thought of that, which is just a bad oversight of ours. So we hadn't planned on soliciting for people to come forward and subtitle, but actually that is an excellent idea. And I think actually now what we'll do is organize an actual effort to solicit for translators to subtitle the talks.
Definitely something for
Yeah.
the follow-up. I know that with the talks going live, because Lawrence and I are on a shoestring budget, this is obviously something that we're doing in our spare time rather than working full-time on this. And not having much of a budget, if anything, to go out there and pay for this kind of thing. There's probably a lot more that could be done pro bono afterwards, and especially things like subtitling would be incredibly useful for helping us get the word out there.
But yeah, if the person who asked or anyone else watching is interested in adding subtitles for a language they speak to all or any of the talks after the fact, then please get in contact with us
Yeah,
via the
please do.
email. I will put the email in the chat now. And yeah, what we'll do is we'll once we've heard from people, we'll then take that forward and we'll get stuff sorted out, because that is a very good idea. So thanks for sending that. I'm just checking the email is right. Yep, that's right. I've sent it in the chat for people. Okay. Okay. And Lenny has said, I know a certain German speaking subtitle slave you could ask. Which not everyone will understand the context of that joke, but if you did, you would also find it funny. But yeah, no. Well, all I'll say is thank you, Lenny. So cool. Okay, those were the ones that came in via the form. Since we've started, there were some more that have come in the chat. And I know we've just come up to an hour as well, so we'll keep our eye on the time. Maybe we can go. Are you okay to go for another half an hour if needed, and we can cut off at an hour and a half?
Yeah, another half an hour. I'm definitely down for that.
Cool. Okay, cool. So here's
Exploring
one
Antinatalism podcast.
exactly. So in regards to antinatalism being at a crossroads, are you planning to collect findings of some kind based on the lectures and the responses to them, with the hopes of making a specific, and then there's a second part, recommendation to the community about how we should proceed as a movement? I'm not sure how to have both ones on screen, so because it's got more, I'm just going to keep that one up on screen. Do you want to go first, John, or shall I?
Yeah, I think we're definitely planning some, a reflection stage after the conference. And one of them could be on the recommendations and certainly people's reaction to the talk. I think that is something that we are looking to do. In terms of what that would look like, I think it would have to be quite a qualitative study rather than anything particularly quantitative, in terms of like generally what has been said both during and after the talks in response to what people are saying. I do think that there is, and this is especially what we are trying to do with AA, is that there are a lot of questions to answer with antinatalism. And I do think that how we answer them is really important, like how we arrive at the conclusions that we go in. Because, for example, if a large proportion of the community feels a certain way about a topic, does that mean therefore that we at AA should follow the direction of the community, or should we try and trust our own judgment, or should we try and do some sort of fudging of both? Like, Lawrence and I are by no means, as we've said before, we are by no means experts on any of this stuff, so we really are trying to start a conversation. But I think there is an interesting follow-up point about who and how makes the decisions about like direction that we're really trying to, who answers those questions on direction that we are trying to kind of like start conversations around in the conference. I think that's a really interesting topic. So I realized that was a very kind of waffly question, but just to say, Amanda, yes, we are definitely planning on reflecting on what people have said both during and after the conversation, and then making some like follow-up materials on that.
So I've got one thing to add. Apologies if you did say it, John, but I just had a technical issue I was sorting out, so I got a bit distracted. So one thing we will be doing, which is relevant to your question, Amanda, is that we will be sending out a feedback form so that people can share their thoughts. So we will be sending out 2 feedback forms. The first one will be to the speakers, so the people who were in the conference, giving the talks and stuff like that. And I mean, mostly that will be geared around like the process of like reaching out to them and preparing them for the conference, more of the technical side of things. But we'll also be sending out a feedback form to everyone on the newsletter, and basically anyone we can reach out to. But anyone who comes to the conference, we hope to be able to get a link to them, and we'll make it available at the end of the conference if they stick around for the closing remarks. But we'll be sending out a feedback form for people to give their feedback on the conference, people who were in the audience, and that can be any feedback they want, both positive and negative. Although obviously if it's negative, it'd be good if it's constructive rather than just berating us or whatever. But it will be an opportunity for people to give feedback on anything, technical things, on did we push the speakers far enough, or were we too much of a pushover? Did we leave certain topics out, which has already been suggested in the chat? Like any form of feedback is welcome in that, constructive and good faith, obviously, but is welcome in that feedback form. So that will be a way for us to collect both things that we can improve on, but also judge the feelings of how people receive the conference as well, if you get what I mean. Cool. The next question is from Lenny. On, are you receiving any official support from EA? So I can quickly answer this one. And John, if you want to chuck in anything at the end. So we're not receiving any official support from EA. The closest you could say that we've gotten support from EA is just certain individuals who are in the EA community who are also sympathetic to antinatalism have showed us just moral support. They've said, we think what you're doing is a good idea and we're looking forward to see it happen. But no, in terms of like material support, no, we haven't received any from effective altruism, the community, or individuals in it. Do you have anything to add, John? Oh, I can't hear you. You might have tapped your microphone, so you've turned it off. If there's a red light, then you've put yourself on mute. Try speaking again. Oh, he's gone. Okay, all right. Well, I will go to the next question, and we can come back to that one if John has anything to say. So, okay, right. So the next one is: do you think AA will meet the same fate as Annie? If not, why? And I think John is back. Can we hear you? No, we can't hear you. So, John, I think you've muted yourself on your microphone. Uh, this is level 10 boomer. Oh, wait, John, we can hear you now. John, he's taking his headphones out. All right. Can you hear us? No, go. Right. Okay. I'm gonna just remove John, and I'm just gonna do the stream until he figures himself out. Okay. So, Lenny asked, do you think AA will meet the same fate as Annie? And if not, why? Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a bit of context to this one because some people may not even know what Annie means. So, Annie, for anyone that doesn't know who's watching, Annie or ANI stands for Antinatalism International. So, Antinatalism International was an organization that was set up, was it 3 years ago now? Because it was over the pandemic and the pandemic has warped my sense of time. I think it was either 2 to 3 years ago, something like that. Anyway, so, sorry, I think John might be ready to come back on screen. You ready, John? You just need to unmute yourself on StreamYard because I can see you've muted yourself. Okay, we can hear you.
Now,
Yes, we can hear you.
sorry, I just unplugged and replugged my microphone and reloaded the stream enough, and now it appears that it's working.
Okay, cool. But your audio is coming
now than on the day.
Your audio is coming through your laptop rather than the actual microphone. So if you go into settings and audio, you can change that. But while you do that, I'll carry on answering this question. So, yeah, for anyone that doesn't know, Antinatalism International was an organization that was set up around 2 to 3 years ago. I was involved, and there were a few others involved. I think there was 6 of us in total, if I'm remembering the number correctly. And we and then it I don't know the current state of it in full detail at what capacity it's running, but in terms of running at full capacity, which it was when obviously it first launched, it's not running at full capacity anymore. And yeah, at the moment it doesn't seem to be doing many of the activities that at least it wanted to do initially. So some people might look at that and think, well, is AA just not going to end up the same way? Is it not going to, it launches and then it goes for some time, but then it sort of, it doesn't end up being able to do the thing it wants to do, and there's not really much activity going on in it. Well, the first thing to say is obviously no one knows the future, but I can comment on a few things that at least I have tried to intentionally do differently. And I think John and I are on the same page here of things we're trying to intentionally do differently. We tried to learn from that and do things slightly differently with AA so that the same thing doesn't happen, which obviously isn't a guarantee. So one thing is, we want to take things very slowly. We want to work on just a few. John, are you back?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, nice.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm just having issues on having the stream up next to me. So I'm actually just going to turn it off. So if people could just let us know in the chat if there's issues, and just message in the chat, and hopefully we'd see it come through.
I feel like this is a bad dress rehearsal for the main event in a couple of weeks' time. So we'd rather have all the tech issues now, chat, rather than in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. And I think what I'm going to do is before the actual conference, I'm going to come around your house and show you where the mute button on your microphone is. So
that sounds like a plan.
Yeah, anyway, so there are at least two things I think that are different to Annie that we have consciously done so that the same thing doesn't happen. The first one is that we want to um, focus on a few things or a couple of things at a time. From my assessment of Annie, I think we took on too many projects all at once, and we spread ourselves a bit too thin rather than all working on one or two projects. Um, whereas John and I, we're focusing on at the moment just two things. The second thing is that, and part of that being very focused is also having the same vision. So we want to make sure. So John and I, obviously, we're not the same people. We differ on some things, but on the core parts of AA, we agree on what we want to do, and we know where we want to get to in terms of the activities we want to do, etc. So we are going to, and this is kind of a separate point, we're going to build very slowly. And when I say build, that obviously that can mean many things, but one of the things it means, which is important, is the people that are involved. We want to be very cautious about how many people we get involved and who we get involved, because we want to make sure that we're all aligned. And we want to make sure it's not a flash in the pan. You get too many people on board too quickly, you can't assimilate people and integrate people, then there's divides, and then it can end up breaking up, and etc., etc. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, John. I don't actually know how much you know about Annie and sort of and all that.
Yeah, I think you've covered the two main points there. I think we like really trying not to bite off more than we can chew and doing a couple of things well, as opposed to trying to do a lot. That was a really key one. And as you said, Lawrence, just being very cautious about building slowly, because especially in the early days, it can be easy to be pulled in lots of different directions based upon the people who are involved. So doing a couple of things based upon the shared kind of values, shared principles, shared aims. That's one thing that we can try and do to avoid having the same fate as Annie. But one thing I was going to say about EAs as well is we shouldn't forget that Magnus and that's Magnus Finding and David Pierce are both kind of EA affiliated with EA. Oscar Orta as well has been quite a bit with EA. So there's not really necessarily like an official kind of centralized EA board, if you like, that we have or haven't received support from. Obviously, Michael as well, vegan space scientist, came onto our podcast in our third episode. So one thing I will say is that like while we haven't received like funding from an EA organization or anything like that, not that we've reached out, to be fair, we have received support, and as you're saying, like well wishes from members of the EA community. It certainly hasn't been so far at all.
Yeah. The next question is this one from Mark. So Mark asks, as effective altruists, why market to ANs, a very small group? When ANs, he means antinatalists, instead of vegans, bigger group compared to antinatalists. I assume when Mark says market, he means the people we're trying to influence. I would assume that's what Mark means when he says markets. So do you want to give your personal take first, John? Because I know you've been having issues, so sometimes you've not been able to fully get into some of the questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So I think it's a great question in terms of where we market. I think we haven't necessarily tried to pick a community and said we're solely going to focus on them. I do think that with antinatalism in particular, we're based around an antinatalist philosophy. So the AN community is the most obvious one to go to, because by the name, by our activities, by our kind of founding principles, we are focused on antinatalism. And then in terms of where we expand wider than that, I personally feel, it'd be interesting what you think, Lawrence, is that the EA community seems like the second best place for us to go rather than the vegan community in terms of like, not in terms of where to go, but how aligned that we are. Because I don't think that veganism necessarily entails antinatalism to the same extent that antinatalism entails veganism. I think there are some similarities from a vegan perspective with respect to antinatalism, but I don't think the two entail each other in the same way that if you're an antinatalist and you believe that it's wrong to create sentient beings, then you should really go vegan if you have those views. Also, should I save that one for the spicy takes live stream that we can do?
Yeah, so yeah, because I know what you're going to say, so save it for the spicy takes.
We'll save it for the spicy takes one. It is related to the point Mark. On sperm banks that Lawrence and I potentially disagree on as well. So we'll save that for the spicy takes live stream.
Okay, cool. Okay, and then sorry. So my take on this, on my answer to this question is, well, both John and I think there's value in the approach of effective altruism, but like we're also both antinatalists, so, and we wanted to merge those two things because we think it would be useful, right? Also, just with vegans, like there are already quite a few EA aligned vegan organizations. There are none for antinatalism, so you know, we wanted to make one.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say, when I was first met Lawrence, I was still quite new to the antinatalist community. One of the first tasks I had was to kind of look at the lay of the land. Like I used the phrase sector earlier, which would probably apply to animal advocacy. I do believe that there is an animal advocacy sector in terms of organizations working in this space, volunteers, etc. And with antinatalism compared to veganism, there was really nothing. So it felt like we had, but you can view that in two ways. One, you can view it negatively in terms of like there's nothing to build on, but then alternatively, you can think that there's just a lot of opportunity to really do stuff. So we felt that starting an officially antinatalist organization would be a good start. And again, we haven't, you know, we're hosting this conference. We've managed to put it together with thanks to a lot of generosity from people for free. We have been able to do a fair amount fairly quickly, considering that, again, when neither of us are doing this full time. Lawrence has his YouTube channel to run as well outside of his full-time job. So this hasn't been necessarily, without underplaying all the effort, Lawrence, that you've put into organizing the conference, this hasn't been like a huge endeavor compared to like working on a full-time job, for example. So it goes to show you that you can do things in the antinatalist community, and that really gets to the crossroads point of the conference, is that there are decisions that we could be making right now that could really change the direction of the community going forward. And Lawrence and I don't claim to be the all-knowing, wise sages who know what these decisions should be and the direction should be, which is why we are looking to try and have these conversations now. It's just to say that basically there's a lot of room for growth in the antinatalist community that there maybe isn't in other communities, which is why it might be good for us to start here.
Cool. The next question is again from Mark, and I think because we've got 10 minutes left, what I'm going to do is, if anyone has any other questions, send them now, and by the time we've finished answering this question by Mark, we will then answer the other ones that have been sent, but any more after that we'll probably not include, because, you know, we've got to end at some point and it's coming up to an hour and a half. Cool. So this one by Mark, sorry if that was loud in the microphone. What's your criteria for people getting involved? So there are two things to say here. The first one is, it depends on the capacity that someone is getting involved, right? So John and I have already had discussions about expansion in terms of people who are involved. It's something we are going to be focusing more on next year, you know, after we're done with the conference, stuff like that. There are going to be multiple different ways that someone can be involved, and those will entail different responsibilities and, you know, different levels of engagement. Personally, and I'm sure John is on the same page here, I don't think we're ready to reveal those, you know, different roles and forms of involvement now, so we won't give specifics, but there will be multiple ways that someone can get involved, and each of them will come with different responsibilities, but also different criteria to being able to get involved. Some anyone will be able to apply for, some will probably be invitation only. And yeah, I think, are there any more sort of general details you want to give on that, John, or should we just leave it at that for this one?
Yeah, just to say that there will be opportunities coming out in
Yeah,
lots of different capacities, some very light touch ways, some much more engaged ways. And we will keep people up to date next year on
yeah.
what they are. We'll be able to give a more detailed specification, but just in general, Mark, people who do kind of align with what we're trying to do and, not even agree wholeheartedly, but are concerned about similar cause areas and have a similar kind of approach, admire the aspects of EA that we do in terms of trying to be very impactful. Anyone who kind of aligns on those things, there will be those opportunities coming out next year.
And if you want to make sure you're 100% seeing them when they come out, join the newsletter.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that will be the place to be where you 100% won't miss anything. Okay, so we finished that question by Mark, and no one has sent in any more. There's not been any more questions come in, so we've just got one more question, which is from Lenny again. Lenny is really getting his money's worth for this one, for this stream. But no, it's all good. Thanks, Lenny, for sending the questions in. So this is going to be the last question. It's from Lenny, and it says, "Are you making an effort to avoid associations with ethylism?" So, do you want to take this one first, John, or do you want me to go first on this one?
I think consciously the answer would be no. This isn't something that Lawrence and I have been scheming up behind the scenes. I guess that's something that we, a bit like with the non-sentiocentric takes that we've said that maybe aren't factoring into the conference, or not aren't factoring in, but don't have a specific slot at the conference. This would be another topic that we haven't included this time around, but it hasn't been an intentional exclusion with regards to ethylism.
So this question, it could be answered in so many different ways, so it's kind of hard to answer it fully. But so I think when Lenny was asking this, he wasn't necessarily asking just about the conference. I think he just meant in general.
Oh, with AA in general.
Yeah, just in general. So generally, in terms of the conference, it's not a topic that I would expect is going to come up by name, but some of the issues that people who use the label talk about will likely be mentioned, right? So
Excellent.
obviously Matti Hairi is doing a talk on antinatalism and extinction, right? Where he's going to be exploring different aspects of the question as whether antinatalism does entail extinction, can it be separated, etc., etc. So obviously he's going to touch on things that will be relevant to discussions that people can be having on ethylism. Whether it's going to be mentioned by name, I doubt it, but it's not, again, it's not, it's like John said, we weren't intentionally setting out to avoid that topic. It's just the way it worked out, like it did with other topics. In terms of AA generally, it's a tricky one. So if I'm just going to be honest, I understand that the term and even some of the people behind or associated with ethylism come with a lot of baggage and a lot of drama. And if I'm honest, I don't think, John and I are busy enough in our lives. We're not trying to intentionally attract drama, so it's not like we're going out of our way to associate ourselves with this. But if there are things that we care about and align with what we're trying to do with AA, then we will obviously discuss them as and where it's appropriate. For example, if it comes up in the conference in one of the talks, right? So yeah, I would just say we're not intentionally trying to associate ourselves with it or not associate ourselves with it. It's just something that is out there. At some points, we may talk about things that make contact with the ideas it also covers, but that will be the case with many other ideas. And like we're saying before, we're not setting out to prescribe for people what antinatalism should look like. in terms of saying it should look like a more ethylistic interpretation. We're just trying to generate conversations, help people, facilitate people doing good in the world. And if sometimes that means coming into contact with some things that come under the umbrella term of ethylism, then that will happen. But it's not something. Ethylism is kind of neither here nor there as a term for me personally, anyway. Like, I think the term often attracts so much controversy, and I'd prefer to talk about the individual ideas that people have issues with or contentions with that are captured by the term, rather than get distracted by the term and the personalities associated with it. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
my thoughts.
yeah, I broadly agree. It's not like I'm consciously avoiding it, but I've never personally found the conversations all that enlightening. Like, I guess the ethylism type conversations, and I do worry there is a trend potentially within the vegan community that I worry might be replicated. And I think it actually definitely is replicated in a lot of social movements. And that is around a hyper focus on labels. Like in the vegan community, is it vegan to do X? Is it vegan to do Y? And I worry that these are potentially ways to divide communities further. So in the antinatalist spaces that I've been in, I've kind of not paid a huge amount of attention to ethylism as another label, just because we're already small enough, and I'd rather not get in huge like semantic debates about labels. That isn't to say that there aren't interesting perspectives within ethylism, and certainly as they relate to practical steps that people can take, that was something that I'd be interested in. But a hyper focus on labels or kind of like abstract thought experiments that don't have any immediate application, and the conversations themselves aren't leading to an immediate application, I've personally found them not particularly helpful in the spaces that I've been in. But that isn't to say, again, with AA that we have any kind of anti-ethylism stance or any kind of hard line on ethylism. And again, as with other topics, if you would like them to come up in the conference, we do have both the questions function for like live questions and also the feedback form as well. So yeah, if you feel it's something that is missing, then please do let us know through those mechanisms.
Cool. All right. So those were all the questions. We've covered everything that's come out. Okay, cool. So I was just checking the stream again on my phone. So those were all the questions from the form in the chat. We've been going for nearly bang on an hour and a half now. I want to thank everyone who has come and asked their questions. I hope it's been useful. This will obviously be available after the fact. This stream will be left up on the channel. But yeah, the only closing thing I would say is just get onto the newsletter. I will post the link again in the chat. But join the newsletter. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel if you're not already. All of those good things, because that is the way that you're going to stay up to date with what's happening. The conference is in 2 weeks, so get ready. Put it in your diary if it isn't already. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great time. And it'll be very interesting and a big learning experience for me and John going through our first conference.
Definitely. Especially with regards to tech.
Exactly. That is what I was mostly thinking about. Yeah. So, yeah. Do you have any closing off thoughts, John?
Just a huge thank you to everyone who's joined and submitted their questions to this live stream. And yeah, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, amazing. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and we will catch you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.